Startups never succeed if they always take the back seats, the last rows in the room. So if I can request everybody who's sitting in the back to come up front, there is no punishment to be in the front seats. You actually might have a better experience. So good morning. All right, let's try this one more time. It is 10:15, it's not too early, plus we are in a startup event. Startups are supposed to be full of energy and enthusiasm. Good morning. Thank you so much. So as you're sitting down, welcome and thank you for coming to the first annual Startup Summit under IESA. This is a concept that we started to think about 5-6 months back, and we said, a lot of things are being talked about our industry. We amongst ourselves talk about it. We talk about MNCs, we talk about other things, we talk about what governments are doing. But is there an event where stakeholders of startups and various stakeholders of all the startups can come onto one platform and really talk about something that can be accomplished so that we can move from talking to actually achieving some things? So if I can get my slide up, there are 5 people there in the back who are looking at the slide. There we go. So just in case you are not aware of what IESA is, by the way, are you aware of who I am? My name is Ruchir Dixit, and I earn my paycheck working for Siemens EDA. This is what we do as part of the volunteer group of IESA to do something for the industry and give back to the industry. So essentially, IESA is, you can read through this, I don't want to read it for you, a premier body that represents the industry within ourselves and within the stakeholders in the countries, whether it be government or different kinds of members. We also have chapters that are in different cities, so Bangalore, Hyderabad, there's an NCR chapter, and we're going to start a Chennai chapter very soon. Okay, so the 4 stakeholders, this is weird, right? This typically never happens, or maybe it happens all the time. If you're in a startup, you have to deal with changes as they happen, and you have to pivot and adjust. So we talk about the industry, we represent the industry, we talk to the government to make sure that whatever we need as an industry, the government is hearing and listening to us and doing things for us. Then we work with the academia, because every single one of you who is working in a corporate world today, either your own company or for somebody else, I can bet the number one challenge that you have is that there is a huge lack of talent. A lot of engineers graduating out, but a huge shortage of talent. So we work with the academia to make sure that the talent that comes out of the colleges is hireable and productive sooner than what it is today. And then give back to the society. So just wanted to highlight some of the events that we have done. You may have attended some in the past. The Vision Summit, Spacetronics, Deftronics, and the AI Summit. We have done 2 installments of the AI Summit. And today is the first one of the Startup Summit. So what I wanted to do was just share with you why we came up with this idea of putting together a summit. So when we started to ideate, we started to think about what does a startup ecosystem look like. If you are an innovator who you believe that you have an idea, you are part of the ecosystem. If you are a funding agency who's looking for investment opportunities that have a good ROI in the future, you are part of the ecosystem. If you are the government who wants to promote industry in India, you are part of the ecosystem. If you are a supplier of something that a startup might need, you are part of the ecosystem. You could also be finance professionals who can help startups structure the companies well. You could be a legal expert. So all of you are part of, or all of these agencies are part of the ecosystem. I don't know if you can read that from, whoever is driving this PowerPoint, can we make this bar go away? But anyway, so essentially talking about, if you have an idea, how do you access the market? That's a question that an entrepreneur has. There are people who have been there, done that. If you are an investor, you need access to innovators because you have capital that you want to deploy. You need access to mentors, somebody who can help you get to the next step from wherever you are. So we started to build this mind map out, and today what we have done, all right, so a lot of detail that you will see on the IESA website, we will publish this, lots of details. We have taken each branch to its node, leaf node, but then what we do today is, you will see, you would have seen the agenda. We start off with go-to-market. If you have an idea, wouldn't it be better to hear from people who were at the same stage at some part of their life, took the idea and now are successful, learn from them. Then we talk to the funding agencies. We have different classes of funding agencies that we will bring to the stage. We will have crowdfunding agencies, we have VC firms, we have a VC firm from the UK who's going to join us live, Doralton Ventures, and then we go to two master classes. We will work with a real or two real life examples of how a business plan is to be made and how you make a pitch deck so you can go ask for funding. And then we end with governments coming and talking to us, union government and 5 or 6 state governments, about incentives that they have in their policy to help startups. All right. So the key thing that I now realize that none of you came here to listen to me. That's the key part. And especially if I take this jacket off, I'm dressed like a bouncer at a club. So I should get off the stage very, very quickly. And instead of me, who I want to, this you have seen before, I want to bring Mr. Parag Naik up on stage. The less I say about Parag Naik, the better it is because I'm not qualified. A serial entrepreneur who has built 3 companies and sold these 3 companies. Currently is the CEO of Sankhya Labs. You would have all heard of it. Prior to that, Parag can tell you himself what all he has done. So Parag, welcome aboard. The audience cannot wait any longer to hear from you.
Thanks, Ruchir, and thanks, IESA and Muthu for this event and inviting me here. I realized that there was a game plan that they had, that, So I think the game plan was just to show that, if guys like us can do it, you can do it better, right? So I think fools like us can come together for 10, 12 years and do this. I think the others smarter in this room can do much better. I think that's I think that was the primary message, and that's why, open the innings, so to speak, with this. Interestingly, right, I mean, the GTM part, the GTM strategy, it's actually a very drab topic. I mean, what do you talk about it? I mean, as a keynote in the beginning. So I thought I would structure it such that, I give a bunch of, points, some stories around it, and juxtapose it with our own journeys, mistakes that we made that hopefully you should not repeat, and things that we did do well, very few of them, and that's the reason for where we are today. Also, if you look at it, right, most often, especially in our industry, we tend to look at GTM, marketing, sales, with a little bit of scroll, right? You look down upon these. Actually, the primary function of us for us is to build a product, right? Code, write RTL, schematics, industrial design, or whatever. And once you build a product, it'll sell by itself. That most of us have that. In fact, we started off with that mistake, saying, any time we were not in office, it was a waste of time, right? We were wasting our effort, and you would feel uncomfortable that it's not work, that you're not doing work. But what we realized over a period of time is that, if you take an analogy with football, in football, if you really you look at it, the most underrated people are the playmakers. You will all know about forwards, right? They'll all get all these awards, and you'll know about goalkeepers because they'll save. But very few times the midfielders or the playmakers are really rewarded. But they are the ones who create those chances, who create those moves and get those forwards to actually score goals. I think the role of GTM or the marketing guy in general, I mean, not necessarily GTM, the product marketing guy, is to do that, right? Is to create chances, create these moves that actually eventually end up with a goal or a success in our case, whatever that might be. With that, I'll just give you a very quick fact sheet for those of you who don't know. It's a shameless plug, but I think you need to know the context from where I'm coming from, right? We are one of the first semiconductor companies, private semiconductor companies based out of India, which means not started in the US with a Bangalore office, but founded in Bangalore, invested in Bangalore, raised money, capital from Bangalore. In India, mostly the money came from international markets, though we are located in Bangalore, that's the difference. And then about 3 months back, we got acquired by Tata Tejas. I'll just talk about some of these important features, and I'll also talk about a little bit of our own funding journey, because I think while I'm talking about GTM, it's also good to know what we went through and what you guys should be doing going forward. If you are around for 14 years, the first thing is, right, if you're enough for a long period of time, there'll always be a statistical outlier. Okay, it'll carry you. So the first thing is you have to be prepared to stay for long enough. I mean, you don't start, I'll also talk about in my next slide, you don't start a company to say, I'm going to become a unicorn. You cannot, right? It's a very statistical process. You say, I go try out some things, and if that becomes successful after 2 years, then I go to the next level. And you keep convincing your family and friends around you and everybody around you that we'll do this for 2 years, right? And then the 2 years before become 10. And it becomes like I don't know if you've seen this movie, the book from Guide, R.K. Narayan's book called The Guide, right? It's like the Devanand's character in that movie. I'll refer to him somewhere in the slides as well. He's actually a thief, and everybody mistakes him for the theme of the book is that they mistake him for a sage or for a sannyasi. And in the end, he actually ends up becoming a sannyasi, a thief becoming a sannyasi. That's what happens, right? You start off and then you internalize it and you become that. And that's also the most important aspect in any startup, that you become part of the startup. You don't know whether you are the startup or the startup is you, right? The object and subject fuse. And that's true of any endeavor where you spend a lot of time, right? When you spend about 8-10 years, a lot of things become second nature even if you're dumb. Right? You'll realize that over a period of time, some smart guys get it in 2 years, some of us get that in about 8-10 years. One of the things that we focused on, and I also want to let you know that timing of all of this is very important. And timing is very difficult to get, right? And there are some few players, some guys, even in cricket, timing is all that's important, right? I mean, a lot of guys, in fact, Sehwag or somebody said that they had studied Sachin Tendulkar. And there's no way, there's absolutely no way that you can, you can ever get to that kind of timing, because it's just God-given. It's a gift. So even in our case, sometimes you don't know what the timing is. In fact, when we started off with the concept of building programmable silicon, wireless DSPs. In fact, in wireless arena those days in 2006 and 7, hardly programmable architectures were used. We went into this, we foresaw rather in hindsight, and correctly so, that as you start to get to lower geometries, you have so much compute, you would start to eventually get to a point where you have so much silicon, you have so much compute power that you would want to do stuff in software. So I have a corollary to Moore's law, which we call the law of abstraction, which states that every 8 years, every 7 years or every 8 years, the goal of computer science and electronics is to raise the level of abstraction. Every 7 years, your abstraction level goes up. Once your level of abstraction goes up, you can build extremely complex products. I mean, that's happened. I'll just give you a more easier analogy. Netflix in 97, when they founded, apparently, it seems, they took $3 million and about a year and a half to build a website. 96 or 97, I think, around that. Today, a website is built in 30 minutes by a kid out of college, right? So that is something that you need to recognize, especially if you are doing a lot of digital architectures. We raised money from marquee investors, Intel Capital and GM, and we practically had, I think, what I call the first informal angel group in India. I call the NH4 angels. I've said this very often. You guys know what NH4 is? Anybody? NH4, yeah. The highway connecting from Bombay to Pune to Bangalore. So I call them the NH4 angels because, in fact, we raised money. Muthu is here on a road trip to Coimbatore. The idea of Sankhya was found on a road trip to Coimbatore with Muthu, and we had another investor called Dr. Mohan Chetty. Unfortunately, he's no more. And there he signed on. And then the rest of the investment came from, you would expect a semiconductor company to be funded by all these suited, booted, I don't know, all these foreign sounding names, Kleiner Parkins, I don't even get some of them names properly a lot of times. But it was invested by all villages on that road. From Davangere to Hubli to Belgaum to a town called Satara. Not many people even know about it, right? Why did they invest, right? It's also because later on in hindsight, I asked one of our investors, why did you invest? When the Intel guys came in, he said, this is what all the hi-fi sounding VCs will tell you all over, but they never implemented in practice. He said, we invested you because of you guys. I know you will not do, you'll not do anything bad with my money. So all the business plan making, all the go-to-market strategies, at the end of the day, we are all irrational beings, right? You have to connect with the investor. A lot of times, investor likes you, he'll put money in it. And then he will come up with all kind of strategies and sensitivity analysis on why he made that investment, right? So very often, a lot of guys don't want to do that because they are not capable of doing it. They're all what I call analytical morons. They just keep churning about Excel sheets and cutting and slicing and all of that, but they don't have a gut feel. The only people who do invest are real promoters. So if you can get access to one of the top promoters, and in fact, that's what has happened to us. Any time we met a top visionary, he's come to our office, he's either given us business or given us money. So they are able to see through all of that. So the rest of the middle managers that you get into is always a trouble. And in one of our, maybe I'm going off topic, but I think this is interesting. Initially, we used to start to raise money in 2006, 2007 and 8. We used to go a lot to Bombay. So that's where the money was at that time. And then there was this kid from college who had done this, who was a IIT, IIM, and he was sitting in one of those venture meetings. He was working for Qualcomm for a year or so. That's why they had put him in the meeting. He got into a catfight with us, saying, how can you do F15 software? Not possible in those latencies. And then we practically got to blows with them, actually. We are also not guys who will give up that easily, right? Then he said, I did 8 tape outs in 1.5 years. I said, then the guy who hired you must be a moron, that you did 8 tape outs in 1.5 years, right? So that's how it got in. And then we realized at the end of it, that when you're making a business plan, we used to keep our, our profiles in the end. So we realized that, instead of keeping those profiles in the end, we moved it up front. The first page, you show who you are first, right? It is like you're posturing there. You're saying, I am so and so. In fact, my other co-founders have far better educational qualifications than I had. So we used to say he's a PhD from Eindhoven Technical University. They'll not ask you technical questions, right? So those are some of the tricks, psychological tricks that you have to play and you have to learn when you go along. These NH4 angels actually put money in us, and then we were chasing Intel capital, I think, for about 2.5 years. And Intel said, we're not, this is not a place to build semiconductors. It's not possible. And I always say throughout our careers in the last 30 years, I've seen that since 1992 or 93, they first said, you can't do software, you can't do application software, then you did that, you did embedded software, then they said you can't build chips, then TI and all of that started to build chips, said you can't do this. That's why we are in this demystifying business, and we have to constantly keep, and I'll talk about it, right? You have to constantly keep fighting the system. That's a challenge that we have. It's come down. It's much easier right now in the last 4 or 5 years due to all the geopolitics and also the critical mass of people building up. But those days it was really difficult. And Intel actually invested in us because we used to go, and because of our go-to-market strategy. We didn't have a product. We had an FPGA demo. We used to go to these guys in Sony. In this shiny office they had in Shinagawa in Tokyo, one of their headquarters. So we first went and told him the first year that we were building a software-defined radio for set-top boxes and all of that. So he looked at us because those days, the brown skin, the Indian guys were not well known for semiconductors as much, right? You're all IT guys. You go and talk about IT and systems and they'll listen to you. He looked at me and said, I've got 6,000 people under me here, right? And you think you can do it? But credit to him, once we went back, after a year, he actually became our champion. And then Intel those days was trying to get into this home market, digital home or whatever, in 2006 or 7. They had this idea. And they wanted to have a product mix. So what happens, this product manager from Intel goes to Sony and he says, I want to build this. So this guy tells him that there's this startup in Bangalore, right? Go and put money in them. I want that piece of technology hardened and productized. That's how these connections happen. So sometimes, like I said, if you're long enough, things happen. And timing, you don't know. You just have to try and test. So I'll give you some of the, in the next few slides, some of the strategies that we employed and what you do to ensure that your timing is right. You still can never, you can still never guarantee it, but just like as we have in our PD tools, you have got timing closure. Here also there's some kind of a timing closure, but there's too much slack here. Because we are a deep tech, we like to call ourselves innovation-focused businesses. I don't know how much of that is true, but nevertheless, we are far more innovative than selling stuff on internet is what I think. So therefore, we qualify to be a deep tech company. I guess some of you have known this, or if you're not known, there's this Peter Thiel's nice book called 0 to 1. He talks about it. So we are a 0 to 1 business because we are creating something out of nowhere, right? We're creating either a product or a business model. Well, in our case, a product, a concept of a software-defined radio or a wireless DSP didn't exist before we did it, right? So you're starting from some thoughts, and then you're creating reality out of it. So that's what. So the other businesses are scaling. So most of the consumer internet startup, after they reach a certain level, is all about scaling. It's one to many. The kind of people that you need to run 0 to 1 businesses, the leadership that you need to run 0 to 1 businesses, and the investors that you need for 0 to 1 businesses are very different from one to many. So in India, we have cracked this one to many businesses. So therefore, you'll get a lot of Swiggies and Zomatos and Paytms kind of scale. They're all businesses at scale, right? Or manufacturing. So people understand how to scale those businesses. But nobody can create a business from scratch. Yeah, or rather, not nobody can, but there are very few people who understand and fund these kinds of stuff, right? Also, by definition, these are high entry barrier businesses. It's not very easy, especially in semiconductors. You need to spend some time, have a little bit of gray hair before you understand the entire ecosystem, and also because any business that has got a supply chain in it, right, especially hardware, is much tougher than, and that's why you have a lot of SaaS companies also being invested right now because it's easy to scale, right? But hardware-based things with supply chains and all of that are still a difficult one. By definition, again, a long gestation cycle. Very often, especially when we speak to the government bureaucrats, they just don't understand our kind of businesses. The IT department doesn't understand our businesses, right? There's no way today, see what are our assets when you're building a semiconductor company or any hardware company, they are your IPR. So today, in your financial world, there's no way to use this as an instrument. People know how to depreciate assets, other assets, physical touch and feel assets, but we don't know how to depreciate, or this is not non-depreciating asset, right? And it's like a piece of, sometimes IPR is like a piece of art. It's worth $1 billion in the eyes of the beholder. Van Gogh, when he was alive, I mean, they thought he was a crazy fellow, right? I mean, a lot of times this happens. So you do not know what's the value of IPR you're sitting on, and that asset is not monetizable. So statistically, what happens is you need a critical mass of people, mass of companies before you actually get to one large unicorn or whatever in this space. So very often, standard businesses, you can actually predict where they go. Of course, there is operational issues. It depends on how operationally efficient they are. They can go either way. But the chances of deterministically determining whether a typical one-to-many business can succeed is very easy. An innovation business is basically, you don't have to go far. You have to look at, in nature. It is evolutionary, right? It evolves, and in nature you will see. And this is the story I give of a 20-foot crocodile. We all see the big crocodile, right? Huge fellow, 20 foot, and that's you can look at it as a Google or an Intel or whatever, right? But in nature, that 20-foot crocodile, a period of its lifetime, has gone through so many ups and downs. The chances of its survival are almost 1 in 500. That's how the mother crocodile lays about 500 eggs before one of them can actually become that 20-foot crocodile. So nature has figured this out, right? Similarly, the processes, the incentives to build IPR-based businesses have to be similar. That you have to invest in 50, 100, 200. You have to have a critical mass before you can actually start applying statistics to it. And then you'll have 1 or 2 go become an Intel or go become an Ericsson or whatever, right? Until then, it's not through institutions, right? It's just through sheer luck. So we today in India win one of these through 2 or 3 medals, right? That is because of, in spite of the system, the guys go out of the way and also with little bit of luck. You have to have an institution. Similarly, like for sports, like you have to have an institution that understands these processes and incentivizes the right set of things based on that. And also, like I said, these are statistical in nature. Nobody knows which idea is going to succeed, frankly. The VC, likes to sit there and sit in judgment. a lot of times in India, they pronounce judgment. They are like Arnab Goswami's, right? They like sit and keep saying all kinds of stuff that no, but he doesn't know. The only VC that I have known, I think it's Battery or somebody. They have this concept of an anti-portfolio, which is basically those companies that they thought they didn't invest, were not good, but succeeded, and there's a big list of it. So just because you don't get funded doesn't mean you will be successful, or just because you don't get funded, you'll not be successful. There are two different things. Selling to a customer and selling to a VC is very different. Selling to a VC sometimes is a lot easier if you know the psychology. Also, there's this concept of complementarity in quantum physics, which is more fundamental, right, than causality. Which is complementarity is dualism. That when you have innovation, you got failure all over return rate. All our businesses are we live literally day to day. You don't know a lot of times until you really succeed that, whether you'll survive the next month or not, right? So that complementarity aspects also need to be understood. Very few people understand that they want innovation without failure. They want innovation without investment. That's not possible. Very often everybody has this thing that, I put X amount of money, I get guaranteed money, why should I invest in this? I think, PK, you just said that, right? So that's all over the place. But then you will not get nonlinear successes because of that. And also that's where the incentives to, treat and trade financial IPR as financial instruments actually helps a lot. And then I also want to make a connection with innovation businesses with a concept called total football. I don't know if you if you guys, anybody knows total football? No? Anyone? Muthu, you'll know, right? Yeah. So total football was a concept introduced by Johan Cruyff, Dutchman, I think in the 70s. And typically, if you look at usual football, especially the English boring football, the right winger is on the right side, the left winger is on the left side, there's midfield, there's defensive guys and all of that. This guy introduced a concept in total football, anybody can play any go ahead, right? So the defender can go and score goals, or the forward can come and defend. And now the coaches on the other side don't know what's happening, right? But for that to work in unison, all of the guys, you should be practically mind reading each other. Because the guy who's passing the ball to you is expecting you to be behind and you are ahead, then it's gone. It doesn't work. So it worked beautifully until they figured out, the Germans figured out how to break this. So that's why innovation, in some sense, is like total football. It is a lot of chaos. And then in the conventional sense, it doesn't play up. In fact, Johan Cruyff also later on invented what you probably would know in the recent thing is tiki-taka, which the Barcelona club plays. That's also a variation of total football. And finally, innovation is, it's for the sake of innovation. In Indian mythology, there's this concept of Leela. Leela is the divine game of God. You play for the sake of play. Sometimes, if you play for the sake of play and you don't really attach anything to the outcome, chances are you will succeed. You'll have seen yourselves in life, you put too much pressure on yourself, things don't work. You just give it up, you say, I don't care now. And you go beyond that point, things begin to happen. I don't know what it is, it's a strange law, the divine law, and that's why they came up with this concept of, Leela. So you have to play Leela. Krishna played Leela, right? Which is play for the sake of play. A lot of times, we are too serious and, you take too much this thing on numbers and Excel sheets and all of that. You don't realize the fun part of it. Having said that, I'll come back to my main theme of the, talk, that is basically, the GTM strategies for semi or generally any startups. I think I'm biased to it because we run a semi startup. We also run an EDA startup and also, hardware, software startups. So generally these things play up. Usually the sales are evangelical. When you're in a 0 to 1 business, one of the founding team has to morph himself to become a sales guy or a GTM guy. It cannot be surrogated to third party. We have seen this time and again. We all think that I get an EVP marketing from a very big company and transplant him into your company. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work because a lot of times when you get an EVP or somebody from that big company, it is the company that's carrying them, right? A lot of times in case of startups and in case of this, the founding team is betting their name. A lot of guys give you sales because of the founding team or because of the team that you have, not because of the company that is backing you. And also, like I said, doing sales, go-to-market is looked down upon generally, right, in India. I mean, I don't know whether it's true in the West, but at least in India, at least in our circles, that is something that, the guy who doesn't clear his examination ends up becoming a sales guy, right? So all the smart guys become engineers. So that is usually our stuff. But, for what I realize, a good scientist is always a sales guy, right? When you found a startup, you are selling. You're constantly selling. You're selling to your employees because you're selling to your investors. You're selling to yourself first, right? So a lot of times you have self-doubt, right? You have to sell to yourself also. So you're constantly selling. It's just that you don't know. You're unaware. In fact, when I was growing up, I was told that I would be one of the worst sales guys that ever be, that anybody would come and fool me. I was a very bad negotiator. But turns out that, over a period of time, I realized that, well, they call me a lot of times to negotiate. Well, I said, yeah, I have to go and tell back my... It's because... I'll also talk about that, right? A lot of times, you have to build win-win relationships. I'll talk about it a little bit. The other thing that we miss out as we start off is basically we don't do a customer-first strategy. We all, like I said in the beginning, we are technologists, right? We like to dabble, we like to build things. We say, okay, once it builds it, it'll take care of itself. Selling will take care of itself. That's usually what technical founders do, right? So it's always good to engage with customers right from the beginning. Like I told you the story about Sony, right? You don't know where benefits, even if you don't have a product, it's good to go and talk. But then what happens is I'll talk about the attributes of some of these. You should be ready to face humiliation quite often, be ridiculed. So actually a startup in some sense is a spiritual journey, right? It flattens your ego. But if you become successful, your ego becomes too big. That's a different issue. A failed startup is better because it completely flattens your ego out, right? Because you know that. But and then also in the founding team composition, more often than not, sales is an afterthought, right? So either if you don't have a sales guy or a finance guy in your team, one of the guys has to morph into that. I think that's very important. And I also feel a lot of times that the CTO is the best sales guy and the marketing guy. And that's why in my initial role, I was the CTO and the VP marketing. And we didn't realize it at that time, but eventually it turned out that, that was a good move, because if you don't do, and a lot of guys don't like the title of marketing guys, especially the technical guys, right? Product marketing or strategic. There are two kinds of it, right? There's product marketing where you find out interfaces, specs, talk to the customer and do that. And then there's strategic marketing, which is basically figuring out what product, after talking to a different set of customers, should you actually build. That part should be with the CTO or with the founding team, right? Otherwise, it doesn't work. That's a mistake that we also made. And then, but we corrected it over a period of time, and then one of us became the face of the company, which actually goes out. And I always keep saying this, is that psychology is far more important than technology, right? A lot of times technologies don't succeed, not because they're not good, it's because it's perceived. You get, a lot of times, it's not about whether you can do something or not, it is the investor has to understand. Right? The investor has to feel comfortable, or the customer has to feel comfortable that you can deliver. It's not your capability. So the only people who can cut through all the stuff and see the passion in your eyes are the visionaries, and they're very far and few in between, generally in the world. And in India, they're even lesser, right? So always try and play on the psychology and read a lot of books on psychology. In fact, there's a first principle of psychology which says that if you know the way I look the world, then you'll know why I behave the way I behave, right? So therefore, we always tend to say, why is he behaving like that? Because the world he looks at is very different. So VC looks at very differently, right? He has to return his investment. A bureaucrat has his own set of things that he has to look through. So you have to understand their psychology first, and then sell accordingly. Pivot is a fancy name for saying that you failed, right? It didn't work. And a lot of times we have seen you start off somewhere and you end up somewhere else completely, and that's very normal. And don't be afraid to pivot when actually things don't work out. We have actually changed. We have done at least 3 to 4 pivots. We have had 3 to 4 pivots and 2 near-time death experiences. We almost closed down in 2011, I think. Yeah, we closed down. I don't know how we survived. And then again in 2016, we came back to the same situation. We actually went bankrupt. We were close to closing in a week's time, right? and we turned around from there. So it is normal. The only thing is, you should have the nerve to stand there and see through it. So therefore, when these things happen, pivot. And if you can pivot as early as possible, like I said, you don't know whether the timing is right. The way you ensure the timing is right is you basically just do what's done in typical ML loops, right? You sense the environment, you observe, you apply something, doesn't work, adapt, and keep this in the loop continuously. That's the process. That's the process for anything in life. Even products go through that, but more so in the GTM strategy. Your GTM strategy can change, and we should not be religiously wedded to any one particular go-to-market or idea or a business model. You should change as frequently as possible, because at the end of the day, it is what success matters. And then very often you can pivot more easily when you start thinking platforms right from the beginning. And now I realize that the stuff that we built, architecturally itself lent to pivots, because we could attack different markets. We started off trying to build stuff for initially for the set-top box and the television markets. We built a software-defined radio programmable modem, which is unheard of in all of those markets. And one of the conscious decisions we took first is we are not going to support satellite. We are not going to do satellite business. And our first revenues actually came from the satellite market. So you don't know. You really don't know, right? And there's also this thing on, should you excessively focus on one thing or should you diversify? It all depends, actually. Typically anti-fragile system, focus is very good. Super specialization or focus is good when times are good. Because when times are bad, diversification is slightly better, because you have, when you focus too much, you have the point of failure. There's only one point of failure and it's gone. Whereas when you diversify, you still have something to grow. But again, it depends on the attitude. It depends on what's the management bandwidth that you have, how big your team is on the management side to handle different platforms. Also, very often I've seen that, and we started off saying, okay, 2007 we build a chip, 2010 we start selling it, 2012 we'll go IPO. That was the idea, 2013 probably. When the rubber hits the road, things completely change, right? So at that time, we had a lot of offers from very big companies to actually take our IP out. He says, no, I'm not going to give my IP, right? I'm going to sell a product. In hindsight, if we had taken one of those deals, probably, we would have had a smoother ride. So don't worry about business models also. If you have a certain business model, change it. Especially in semi-startups, if somebody likes your IP, just sell off the IP. Bring partnerships. Sometimes also do a bit of services, high-end services around your product, build products. So we pivoted from being a chip company to a systems company to what now I call a platform company, right? And also one of the strategies to do that also is also to open source stuff that you could, right? If you're doing something new and if it's not selling, the best thing is open source it, right? Give it off to everybody. Like we need to build processes and systems around that. We're still not comfortable in India in doing that. In fact, the DSP instruction set architecture that we had was very unique. I thought at some point in time we should kind of open source it and give it out to everybody. But then our board and investors didn't do it. But it's a good idea to also ponder sometimes. Also, when do you engage a customer? As early as possible. Like I said, you should be willing to look foolish, and the best way is to get a customer when you're starting the company. I think a lot of guys have done that. That's the best thing, because then what happens is he'll guide you a go-to-market to an extent. Of course, there are flip sides to it, but it's a much easier journey than not having a customer on board. And especially in the semiconductor part, if you get one interface wrong somewhere, a lot of times, your whole market is gone off. So you have to be constantly guided by the customer. And the lucky ones, like I said, get investments from customers so that he's got the skin in the game there. And what are the general GTM strategy? One final thing that I would like to let you know is, find your niche. Basically, this is from the military state. It need not be Shivaji, but there are a lot of other stories as well. What did Shivaji do when he faced the Mughal army, right? He never engaged them on the plains. If you look at the Indian topography, if you crossed the ancient Indian topography, if you crossed Peshawar, Khyber Pass, you got 2,500 kilometers of plains. So if you cross that, and if you have a fast cavalry coming in, which is what the Turks and the Arabs did, they had these fast cavalries. You could really go through it. But once you cross to the south over the Vindhyas, it becomes very difficult. So Shivaji figured out that if he engaged the Mughal armies in his passes, he could beat them really badly. And a lot of battles he won without ever having to even fight a battle. So the point I'm trying to make here is, try to find that niche and don't go out of that niche, at least initially, until you grow big. Once you grow big, you go out to the plains and start fighting them. That's how the Maratha strategy was. And then there's this concept of Maginot Line. I don't know, again for the military history, the Second World War. You got to know your competition. Got to know what, a lot of times you got to find out what the other guy is not doing or what the big guy is not doing and try and do that. In the First World War, the Germans lost, right, the First World War. And until the First World War, they usually had cavalry, right? They still had horses and cavalries and some infantry, and there was some mechanized warfare, where the tanks just started to appear. The French felt that there's this Maginot Line, there's this mountain, I think, it's called the Maginot Line now, between Switzerland and France, or one of the borders. And they thought that you could never get a tank across that, because that terrain was so difficult. A German engineer spent 25 years just perfecting that. He knew that weakness. And in 1941, when Germany attacked France, France had one of the largest armies and air forces in the world at that time. They surrendered in 2 days because they were taken aback by the fact that these guys came over. One entire division of the German infantry, Panzer division came over across. They were shocked. This is a lesson for us also, because a lot of times these big guys are focused on something. They miss out the next disruption. They miss out the next inflection point. So you got to constantly think about what that inflection point is. But nobody knows what that's going to be. You just have to try and figure out. And if, like that German engineer spent 20 years building that tank that would go over the Maginot Line, we should also look at our own Maginot Lines. It's basically find out your niche and know your competition very well, especially the larger competition. Other thing is, in India, I think Taiwan does this very well, is what I've realized. They're all frenemies. They all collaborate and compete. They all come together. And in India, we somehow tend to, at least my limited experience, we don't collaborate. Right? We don't collaborate at all. We always think of the other guy as a competition. For a startup, I mean, the world is big. The pie is huge. Getting the ecosystem together is more important sometimes than getting all of it for yourself, right? Don't look into other splits. You look, as long as you are fed and the other guy is fed, you'll all go together. This thing is something that is very important. So strike partnerships with other startups in your geography and outside the geography, right? And again, in all of these, try and create win-win deals. We try to mostly create lose-win or win-lose deals, right? When you're big, you do a win-lose deal. And when you're small, you do a lose-win deal. You lose, he wins. So when you're big, always try and, that's why, I end up being a good negotiator, is because you always try to look at from the other guy's side. Is basically, you don't try to kill him. If you try to kill him, and this is typical, our way of doing business in India, right, is to kill your supply, kill your vendors until you extract the juice out of them until they do. That doesn't help. So as some of you grow bigger, I think you always keep that in mind, that it's an ecosystem that needs to survive, not just you. And the last part is basically branding and media engagement. I think we are all media shy. We were also very media shy until we got an advisor who said, you have to go and talk to the media, right? You have to go talk to the media and brand. And branding necessarily doesn't mean get a half-nude Bollywood or a full-nude Bollywood star and sell that. That here, when we say branding, you create a brand yourself as a technical brand by your thoughts, by articles you write, by patents you write, by networking in general. Right? You basically want to create thought leadership in your area. That's how you create branding. And in the media engagement, also, you have to engage with them periodically. It's always good. They're also looking for stories. Right? And by the way, not everything that comes in the media is true. But then, therefore, you understand the psychology and you can plant a story when you want. Right? There are second-order effects of this. A lot of investors discover you. Suppose you get featured on Economic Times or, say, Mint or something. Then a lot of people know about you. Right? And a lot of people are interested in your stories. So go out to them. When I first had a first media interaction, we engaged a PR company very late, and the lady on the other side was shocked. She's saying, "How can you talk like that to the editor of a very well-known?" I said, "This is what I talk. If you want to, he wants to listen, he can listen." Luckily, what happened is the other guy liked the frankness, and then we built a very good relationship. And then what happens is once you build a relationship with them, they'll come and ask you questions, right? They think you are the thought leader, even though you are not. So that's how you create the hype. And this also plays in psychology. It's called the availability bias, which is basically you go to what is available to you. So if you keep appearing in LinkedIn very often, you will get more chances to speak. So after that event happened, I was called at IESA to speak on leadership. I said, "Oh, what do I know about that?" They discovered that, on LinkedIn, somebody has put up something. It's as simple as that. So you exploit that bias of people on that. Also, like I said, customers help you. And the other thing is basically very often the flip-flop, right? Whether to flip or not. This is a question. Flipping is actually changing headquarters. And we contemplated it quite a few times. And in hindsight, we should have done it. Because, if you're trying to grow desert in a you're going to rice in a Rajasthan desert, you will put your blood, you will put your tears and all of that, you will get, half a kg of, rice out of an acre. And then you go to the guy who's selling around the banks of Ganga, he can just throw a rice slide and get it. So you wasted a lot of times. So you have to go to where your customers are, independent of the geography, I think, and the investors are. And we were too emotional about being indigenous, and maybe that also reflected in our valuations. So, and then on the same note, I think we have this colonial mindset that we need to exploit in India. I call that the Swami Vivekananda route. The Swamiji was hanging around in India for 2 years, hanging around all over the place, walking around like a fakir. Nobody knew him. He goes and gives one address in Chicago, he becomes a world star. And then everybody accepts him. Gandhiji wouldn't have been Gandhiji if he was not in South Africa. So the point is, you have to get in the Indian mentality, especially in our bureaucrats and other mentality, you have to succeed there first, then they'll accept you here. That's the Swami Vivekananda route to Delhi. It goes via Chicago. So you go to Chicago and come. And finally, you network like hell, right? And we have this concept of diversity receivers in communication systems, which is basically you increase, if you get uncorrelated information, you increase your SNR by 3 dB, which is double the SNR, which is basically be open to receive any information from any side. Network, and that's the best way to do it. And very often people don't network. We all sit in our silos. You don't go out and meet people, especially even the engineering team. In fact, I keep telling my team that every month go have lunch with somebody else, somebody you don't know. You exchange ideas. Everybody says, no, it's my IPR. It's like, I know, that's the challenge that we have, right? We have to be open and network like hell. That gives you a good... So what's the general attribute of a typical GTM marketing person? Again, firstly, no religious beliefs. Not in the sense religion. Religious beliefs in anything, in your idea. If you have a religious belief in an idea, you become an intellectual terrorist because you will not change. And you got to hold strong opinions very weakly. You can have very strong opinions, but hold them weakly. The moment data comes and changes your opinion, change it. If you don't do that, you have a problem. You will not be able to go, because then you'll try to show the customer or the other guy that you are smarter. Never get into the meeting to try and show that you are a smarter. Even if you want to show that, you do it very subtly. And that's an art that you will learn over a period of time. Usually multidisciplinary in Indian ecosystem, the VP marketing position, the marketing, getting a good marketing guy. Marketing guy is not PR and all of that. Product marketing guy is next to impossible. We don't have that. So tech is given, right? The fact that you are already built a company or building a product is a given. It's the sales and the and understand a lot of psychology. You will see that if you have to understand your own psychology and the other psychology, then you can sell far better. This is something that I learned over a period of time, and I do use it once in a while. You have to be very, very strong-willed because I have not attended an interview since 1999. But every day we get interviewed, right? So every day you get rejected, right? You have to have a very strong will, to put up with uncertainty. And with a very light ego. Of course, you cannot have no ego because it's impossible. Otherwise you become a Baba. Try and keep your ego to the bare minimum. That helps a lot. And then tend to have firefighter-like workloads. So if you look at a firefighter, usually most of the times he is doing nothing or he's just practicing. It's that one time that he does something that is very important that actually saves it. The same thing with, and I like to see all these discovery channels with kids. It's very interesting that there's a lot of things that you can learn there. So if you look at the Pride of Lions, right, usually there are a lot of lionesses and there's one or a couple of male lions. The fellow male lion, he does nothing. Most of the time it's the lionesses who hunt and give him food. But there are once or twice, the lionesses can't go, this guy goes and gives one big thing and makes it. So that's what, focus on those big things that you can actually do. Okay? I hope I'm good on time or, okay, I'm tend to talk. I think you would have seen this in a lot of small businesses in India, right? I think we have this in our office also. So you got Lakshmi at the center. Goddess Lakshmi, you got Saraswati, and you got Lord Ganesha. Saraswati is IPR, right? Knowledge. If you're too IPR focused, you become a tech company and no sales, right? No finance. Lakshmi is finance, and there are too many of them in India. In Bombay, most of them are Lakshmi focused, right? They're not focused on Saraswati. And the third one is Ganesha, which is, he was Vignaharta, which is solving everybody's problems. That's management. So when all these three are in balance, is when you get a good go-to-market and a good successful company. All the three have to be in balance. If one of them goes out of whack, then it's not a complete company. Yeah. And finally, in conclusion, a startup is like a movie. Every movie is different. Just because your last movie succeeded doesn't mean you will succeed now. So it's the story, plot, how you execute, timing. When did the movie release? Actually, there's this movie called Andaz Apna Apna. I don't know whether you guys know. It's a Hindi movie. In 93 or 94 it released. It was a flop at that time. But that movie grew on, right? And it became a cult movie later on. And some of those characters became cult characters. There are so many such movies. Sholay, when it was released in 1975, they were scared. The first week, it was supposed to be a disaster. And then it picked up. So you don't know. You don't know. It's same. So all I said is just it's not a cookbook recipe. It's just a thing you got to create your own. I gave you a contour. You got to figure your own way out. A lot of times, you should be ready to look foolish in the short term. I don't know what those guys are doing here. Very often we have heard that. People have told us about that. Because you have to wait for your time. Now, in fact, in our industry, we have become thought leaders because we have predicted that all the communication systems and the RF and all of that will eventually get to a software-defined version of it. And lastly, there's this movie actor again. I used to hate him, actually. I don't know, I found him a joker. But I watched one, he came on a program in 2003 or 2004 when we were going through our difficult times when we were in our first startup. I think there's this program called Simi Grewal Talks or something like that. And I don't know, my wife was just flipping through it. We looked on, loathed them anyways, but this man said, so Simi Grewal asked him, 1977, Dev Saab, from 1977 to 2002 or 2003, you not had a single hit. You made 9 movies. I thought he will say the people don't understand the movie, this fellow don't know what he do, the producer didn't know what he did. You know what he said? I make movies for me. If people don't want to watch it, let them not watch it. Just do it. So that is what it is. Sometimes when you approach a problem with that, just do it attitude without worrying about the outcome, a lot of good comes out. Yeah, thank you. I hope I covered some of the stuff.
So we still have a few minutes for QA if you're willing to take some questions. Yeah. Any questions from the audience? The mic. Yes. So I saw that hand first, but I think the mic is reaching you first.
Hi, good morning. I would like to request to share one of the instances where being looked fool.
Yeah. So I told you, right, they're saying, when we first came up with this concept of a software-defined radio, they said it's not possible. You cannot do it. It will not work. I mean, what kind of cranky fellow are you, right? I mean, all these senior white-haired architects with ponytails and all in the US, it's not going to work.
Who are they?
I can't name them. I'll do that in private. There are, and then investors also, right? One investor even said after lunch with him, breakfast. He had called us to one of these fancy hotels. We couldn't afford to go to these hotels, right, those days. He said, you are either very foolish or very courageous. I told him, yeah, you got to be both. And then that be foolish, be angry came later, right? It was not during that time. It is that. We see, whenever you come up with a new idea, right, you always have to look foolish because it's going to look very weird. And for yourself also, there are a lot of ideas that don't make sense at that time, but suddenly they make sense at some other time. And you see, even in, I'll tell you, one of the pivots that helped us is basically now we have moved to the infrastructure business. We were very conscious about when we were in the consumer domain, when we were selling chips in set-top boxes, TVs and phones, you were very conscious about power, low power, low PP. But in the infrastructure business, it's very different, right? Now you suddenly realize, like I said, this is the Maginot line for us. You know, here we can beat the bigger guys because our architecture is much superior. So that what looked foolish there looks very interesting here. So it is.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. So my question was regarding the Think platforms, exhortation that you made. So most people, when they start out, they have a single product idea. We know exactly what we want to make, right? So what is your advice in terms of trying to diversify that and Think platforms?
It's very specific to each product idea. I can't just tell you that. It is just a thumb rule. You should look at it. Like for example, you can't think, well, if you try to create as many reusable blocks, right? Or whatever, so that you can spin off new derivatives quickly. That's one way to look at it in, maybe in analog and RF parts kind of thing. In digital architecture, it's more easy, right? You try to put bake more and more things in software. Don't bake it in hardwired architectures. So you can actually move this easily, right? And then generally, platforms also is basically if you look at Linux and all the other things that are there, right? They are all platforms, right? So try and make it expansive, the product line expansive. While you still attack a focused market, you try and see you can pivot very quickly. That's what I mean by thinking about platforms.
Thank you.
Thank you, Parag.
There's one more question, Ruchi.
There's one more question. So we have time for only one last question. We're completely out of time, but you can go ahead.
Yeah, initially in your talk, you said like mostly your product was focused on indigenous systems that got reflected in your evaluation. So how do you identify the market at very early stage?
No, I didn't say that. What I said is we started off initially looking at global markets, not sorry, this is getting warm, not Indian markets. See, if you are, like I said, if you're trying to sell umbrella to a guy who's never seen rain, there's no point. He is not going to like it. So you have to try and go to places where they like, where the rain is and the value of an umbrella. So that's what I meant. It is not because when you are based in India, deep tech companies, because there's no ecosystem. See, the same company in Israel or in China has a very different valuation. We've seen that. Because Israel is known. That's also the part of the ecosystem growing, right? We have to go to an ecosystem where it is known that companies from India can actually build deep tech and will also be valued. So there is a geography, there's an Atmanirbhar discount you have to give when you are in India.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure a lot of you saw lots of things on the slides and the personalization of those points by Parag. So Parag, thank you so much. There are two things that struck in my mind. One is, as the VP of Sales at Siemens EDA, I have no future in a startup. Second, I still have a career in sales because you said that's very important. So thank you so much. Again, thank you so much for doing this.